Al Paul. We're about a minute away from getting started here. Julie Clifford or somebody else, if you wanted to hit me up in the chat window and let me know that the audio is working for you. I want to make sure I'm being heard across North America this morning. So are you guys hearing me when I talk? I want to somebody hit me up on the chat window and let me know that you guys are hearing me out there. Oh, beautiful. I have to look at the other place in the Saskatchewan, the special Saskatchewan show answered questions window. Beautiful. Marvell Bradley can hear me in Saskatchewan. That's a great thing. I don't know why that doesn't come in the big window where I'm expecting it to. We'll go in about half a minute or so. Beautiful. Ho, ho, ho. Happy holidays. Hi, I'm Al Paul. I'm one of the support analysts. Probably have talked to most of you folks over the last few years. And I'm really pleased to be here today to present our final webinar of the calendar year in which we address next year. We're going to talk about setting ourselves up for next year. Now, a little housekeeping. We are going to run on mute today because we found out through experience that the audio works way better. And questions will be handled after the session, not during. If you have a question, email it to our support staff like any other question. That way you are helping us manage any questions you might have so we ensure that we're following up properly. We are recording the session today. Thankfully, I do not have a webcam, but the presentation itself, including audio, will be posted on the internet. You can link to it from our community pages, community.schoollogic.com. I have practiced this presentation, and I should be able to get you out of here today in under an hour. For our display purposes today, we will be using SchoolLogic 3.1.283. SIRS 4 has many of these same steps, but I must tell you, we had some internal discussions this last couple of days before I actually put the final version of this together. If you are a hybrid client, and by that I mean one of those schools who uses SIRS for some things and SchoolLogic for others, we highly recommend all work you see today be completed in SchoolLogic. Start on one side of the house, stay there. Now usually at this point in one of these webinars, I'd give you a little outline of what we're going to discuss. This time around, I want to begin by telling you what we are not going to discuss. We are not going to discuss actually scheduling your students for 2013-2014. An hour from now, or maybe a little less, you are not going to know each and every step to formulate a school schedule. What we are going to discuss is setting yourself up to create that schedule. What are some of the things you could do this month and maybe right after the holiday break to get yourself into good position to create schedules? In other words, if this were basketball, today's presentation would not be so much about your power forward slamming the ball home for 2 points, as it would be about setting the picks, the ball screens, cutting your backside forward off of those to get her free to get the pass and hit a bunny. Today is about setup. Oh, and I hope to throw in some troubleshooting tips as we go along. So where does all of this next year stuff start? Well, it starts with actually creating next year. You are going to actually witness me create next year in just a few minutes. That is the step which creates our next year tracks, and a minute after you do that, you actually create the master boards in which you will create next year's schedule. Since the very first thing which Create Next Year does is actually creating next year's tracks, let's start by examining those tracks. So we're going to go over here on my monitor that you're still looking at, and we are going to look at Firefox. And amazingly enough, I was logged in before you guys even got in the room. And we have, by the way, we have a really great attendance today. We have 65 people here today, 6'5", and I know it's probably a little crowded out there for you, and I appreciate you guys not jostling or be too loud, but I do appreciate you guys coming out today. I know some of you guys walked through some weather to get here, and I appreciate that. So I tried to be prepared, and I'm prepared because we are logged in here as a middle school. We are a middle school principal right now, and I wanted to show you the tracks that we start out with. So this particular school, I've got one track for each grade level. Totally within the rules. Not everybody does that, but you can certainly do that if you want. I've got a 6th grade track, a 7th grade track, an 8th grade track, and then I've got a couple of older tracks. PY in this particular database means previous year. So last year I had 2 tracks, one for 6th grade, and then one track that contained both 7th and 8th grade. So I just want to point out, too, this is an actual school database. What I've done, actually one of our client databases, what I've done is I've run it through our data mixer, and that masks the student names, masks the staff names, even changes the school names. We protect the guilty as well as we protect the innocent. When you create next year, and we'll do that in a minute, the software will create an NYR track for pretty much every track that's visible when you run the command. So my advice would be, now is a good time to delete the tracks you no longer need. If you let these tracks hang around after you create next year, you're going to have twice as many tracks to get rid of. So I like the theory that you'd be getting rid of these about this time. Now, really, truly, if you were going to do this right now in your real data, before we go any farther, I would advise you to make a backup. And when you create next year, keep in mind, you're creating kind of a second world. If you mess something up early on in that, it's nice to be able to go back and start over. But a word of caution. Remember, when you restore from backup, you will lose whatever work other people have done in SchoolLogic or SIRS since you made the backup. So if you're the guidance counselor or the building principal or a building secretary at a particular building and you're working on next year, remember, you probably have other staff either in your building or other buildings working in current year right along. So keep that in mind. Fortunately, there is an attractive alternative to restoring everything from backup. You could simply delete the one messed up master board from next year. Or better yet, create a new master board. Don't delete the one you don't like until you're really, really sure you won't be needing it. And we'll show you this concept in a minute. But here's another piece of advice for early next year. When you're working with master boards, and this is, you know, you're well into the process, boy, you're getting those kids to go into the classes, you're really pleased. Let's say you've got 80% of your kids scheduled. But boy, you sure would like to get to 85%. And you think maybe if you move those 3 geometry classes, that could get you to 85%. You like what you have now, but you'd really like it even better. Simple. Make a copy of that master board. I'm going to call it the 80% master board. Copy that. Then, in the copy, go ahead and change those geometry classes. Run the sim, see if that number gets up to 85%. If it does, hey, great, move forward with that copy. If you don't like it, you can always go back to the 80% board. So while we're doing all of that, you know, sometimes the name of the master board isn't enough to remember. So when you've got multiple master boards, you know, I went into one client last year, they had 9 master boards. Hey, bully for them. You know, they're out there trying different combinations, they're trying different things to get their kids scheduled. Start making paper notes, okay? Because you aren't going to remember just based on the master board's name where you were at with that. So a word of advice for down the road. We're not going to do anything near that involved today. However, I would advise you against running the specific process you're going to see in a minute called Create Next Year. Don't run that more than once. Every time you run it, it will give you an NYR version of every track you have. You don't really want to keep duplicating the tracks. So it's good to remember, after you've created next year, you can add or delete master boards at any time. I'll be sure to show you how to do that. But first, let's stay here in PowerPoint for just another minute and talk about this concept of 2 worlds. So there's one database. Whether you're in SIRS or SchoolLogic, there's a single database behind all of the work we're doing, SQL database, right? The work we do, the changes we make are all stored in this single database. It's important to understand that while most NYR scheduling work is unique unto itself, there are some tables in SQL which are shared between NY scheduling and what I'm going to call regular SIRS or SchoolLogic. The tables you see listed here are shared between current year and next year. You never want to go into next year, pick those 3 staff members that you know are not retiring. They are retiring this summer. You know they're not coming back. Don't pick them and delete them. Why not? Because you'll be deleting them from current year as well. Well, why is that? Because staff is shared between the 2 worlds, right here at the top of the list. You can add to any of these areas, but if you wish to not use something you already have in one of these areas, either ignore it or in some cases, you can actually mark things as inactive. The exception to what I just told you, because after all, we always have to have exceptions, is tracks. Before you begin the next year process, which I'm about to show you, go in and delete the tracks you no longer use. So, to review, any changes that you make in these 6 areas apply to both current year and next year. Do not make changes. And when I say changes, I largely, but not exclusively, mean deletions. Additions are always okay, but don't delete anything from the above 6 areas until after you've run the rollovers this summer. Oh, quick troubleshooting note for you here. One of the areas that was not showing in the previous slide was templates. And I wanted to talk about scheduling templates separately. You know how you might create a template which covers, let's say, period 1 on day 1 and period 1 on day 2, and then any class scheduled into that template meets the first hour of day 1 and the first hour of day 2 because it uses that pattern, right? Well, we've had a number of schools that go into next year's scheduling and they mess with those templates. They edit them. Don't. If you take that template, which meets hour 1 on both day 1 and day 2, and you edit it in next year's scheduler to meet only day 2, guess what? In your current year, none of the classes scheduled into that template meet on day 1 anymore. Why? Because when you edit an existing scheduling template in next year, it affects the current year template. You can add new ones. By all means, add new ones. But this is not the time to delete scheduling templates or to edit them. So really, my previous slide should have looked like this. Staff, homeroom, room tracks, course student, and template maintenance. These 7 areas are areas where there's only one table over in SQL, and that table is shared between both current year and next year. So let's go create next year. I've been promising it to you for a couple minutes. We're going to actually go do it. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to the scheduling menu and we're going to pick next year's scheduling. And when we get to next year's scheduling, you will find that on the top on the left there are 3 questions that we're going to want to answer. These guys, amazingly enough, it says create next year, and here are my 3 questions that we're going to have to answer. The top one is clear course requests. Now, if you use requests last year, they're still in your database. You remember requests, right? Requests can either be one-to-one or they can be one-to-multiple. And by that I mean this. You could have a request for, let's say, AP Physics. And that's exactly what the student gets, AP Physics. Or you could have a single request maybe called Physics. And when the student enters that request, he's really requesting your Principles of Motion course from first semester and Fluid Dynamics in second semester. My advice is, why clear all those out? Why not keep the ones you have and then modify them as needed or delete individual requests once you get into the NY scheduling process? Question number 2, clear student requests. This means currently the requests which are currently stored with your students. Okay? In 95% of the world, what that really means is we're referring to the requests that got the kids into the courses they're attending right now. Oh, why would you want to keep those requests? That's just my opinion, but you see I've checked this box. Question number 3, clear resources. This question applies only to those students, or rather to those schools, which use Master Board Builder. Do not select this choice unless you use Master Board Builder and a schedule format change is in the offing for next year. For instance, maybe you're moving from a fixed day schedule to a relative day schedule. Otherwise, leave this button alone. Once we've made our 3 choices there, we go down to the bottom on the left and we say create next year. And we're immediately hit with this big warning. Are you really sure you want to do this? Selecting yes will remove all existing master boards. Well, I'll tell you what, if you select no right here, amazingly enough, the entire process comes to a crashing halt. So let's click yes. Now, I've done this in practice, and for this particular database that I'm using, the process is quick enough that I can actually do this during a live discussion like this, and most of you will actually remain awake all the way through it. There are 2 critical things going on right now, and to be honest with you, they're actually already done. So here's the 2 things that have happened while I was yapping. The system copied information and moved things around to create the next year environment, and next year's tracks were created. That's huge. One of the most common questions we get on the help desk involves those error messages which talk about tracks being invalid. Whenever I see that message, I know that the process I just showed you is not how that school created next year tracks. For better or worse, SchoolLogic, and mostly for worse, SchoolLogic will let you create tracks manually. Don't do it. When you create tracks manually, they never work right. So even if you're a school which does not schedule your students into classes by time of day, you still need to do the steps I just showed you. Every school needs to do the create next year steps that you've just seen. That's how we can ensure you're creating tracks for next year that actually work. Do not create your tracks manually. Hey, Christmas is coming. The kids are getting antsy. Many of us are experiencing the transportation joys which winter storms bring us. So I understand there's a lot of distractions out there right now. But I'm telling you, if you remember nothing else from what I say today, remember this. You must run this create next year process to create your 2013-2014 tracks. Do not create tracks manually. If you do, you will surely slide off the road later. Okay, let's go back to SchoolLogic. What are we going to do next in SchoolLogic? We're going to create next year. We did that. The process is now complete. We have new tracks, which I'll show you in a minute. we have this new master board to work with called the default master board. Now, it's important to understand that the default master board is blank. A blank board will not contain the current timetable of classes. If you wish to create a radically different schedule from what you have, here's your chance. Further, my advice is you should always have one more master board than you actually wish to work with at any given time. I feel it's always nice to have another master board created that you can fall back on. I've come into some clients, like I said earlier, 9 different master boards. They're doing a lot of creating. They're doing a lot of experimenting. That's a beautiful thing. If you wish a clean board, I would say at this point, let's click Master Boards on the bottom on the right, and we get this nice screen up, and let's copy the default master board. And then my advice to you is work with the copy. You can rename this. You can rename this any way you like. I like to see people put numbers on them, and like I said earlier, I like to see you keep track on a separate piece of paper in your scheduling notebook. Right? If you've been to my good friend Doug Robertson's classes and he's talked about keeping a notebook and keeping a log, it makes a ton of sense. Okay? I personally know educators who keep a log from year to year so they know how they scheduled last year. What steps did they take last year? What happened at this step last year? Makes a ton of sense because one of the reasons that scheduling seems like such a deep, dark process to so many folks is because you only do it once a year. So take notes. And one of the notes I'd have on this year's side of the ledger is the name of all my master boards and what's on them. You know, I talked a little bit ago about having an 80% master board. Write that down somewhere. So I also wanted to show you today the other choice because I know plenty of you do not want to build a master board entirely from scratch. What you'd really like is the current schedule, but you need to bring it forward and you need to nibble a little around the edges. You want to edit a little around the edges. Let me show you how to do that. To create a master board using your current year as a template, here's how it works. You're already in master boards. How did we get there? We clicked on master boards down here. Okay, great. Now click create from current year. And when you click create from current year, the system actually copies your current year master board into play for you to work with next year. And now, just to show you that I also can walk the talk, I've made a copy of that because I always like to have an extra one. Okay, so here's my second copy, and if I were really going to pursue this, I would say this is my working copy, and I'd go from there. Now, I have seen some folks that put an NYR in front of all of these, you know, like our software does with the tracks. Some folks will come in here and they'll say this is the NYR master board. Well, that's a cool idea, but I kind of don't really see the advantage to it because the master boards are only available to you in NYR. They're not available to you outside of this in quote-unquote regular SchoolLogic. So always click submit, by the way. Did you notice when I did that? I clicked submit. I can come into master boards and I can create new ones. I can delete these. I can mess with these at any time during the school year. I'm only going to get the one set of tracks that's already created. Each of these are totally independent of each of the other ones. I can always add a blank one. I can always create from current year. These are ongoing buttons. You can use them at any time. Always remember, hit submit at the end. It's easy to forget. When we created, what we just created there is a master board, you know, that has your current schedule copied forward into it, the classes, the rooms, the teachers, just as they are now. Quiet classrooms they are, too, because there's no students in any of these. Make a mental note, by the way, you do not want to delete the default master board. People that know more about SchoolLogic than I do told me that. They didn't tell me why. They just said, don't delete the default. I said, okay. So that was 50% of what we did. When we said create new year, we did two things. We created the new master boards, and we created the new tracks. Just as I promised, here's NYR 6, NYR 7, NYR 8, and then we also have an NYR version of each of these two old tracks. So in the real world, there are 6th, 7th, and 8th grade tracks for 2012, 2013, and now we have 6th, 7th, and 8th grade tracks for 2013, 2014. Simple. It worked great. Now, a little side note here. Remember how we messed around with NY scheduling? We created those multiple master boards. The create track mechanism only fired once. We only created the one set of NYR tracks, and that's how it works. When you go in and say create next year like I did, that action creates one NYR track for each of the tracks you had in current year. After you do that, you can create as many master boards as you care to. The tracks are done, they're duplicated, they're ready to go. And by the way, when the system created these 2013-14 tracks, they just used the 2013-2014 versions, and I just misspoke, this is 14-15. They just used next year's versions of the same dates, okay? So if I went in and I looked at the current tracks would be September 3 to November 8, November 11 to January 17, okay? Real basic, we just copied the same numbers forward. And I want to point out, you don't have to correct those dates now. I totally understand your governing body, the school board, probably has not even established yet your dates for 14-15. Well, fine and good. The specific dates don't really matter until you're ready to do the rollover this summer. And actually, you can even change those dates after the rollover. What's important during the rest of the current school year is the number of terms and the number of report periods. If you need to adjust those for 2014, 2015, now's the time to adjust them, okay? This school obviously uses semesters. If they were going to go to trimesters for next year, now's the time to build your trimesters, okay? And when you do that, make sure you only edit next year's tracks, because if you suddenly came into this year's track and started to build trimesters, you'd like be on the phone with support. That's not a great thing. Don't do that. And remember, in the next year tracks, it's not the specific dates that matter yet. It's just the number of terms, the number of report periods. The other thing that you can do right away to set yourself up for next year is you can edit the days, the periods, and so on. So your setup days here, this particular school has a 2-day relative daytime schedule. If you wanted to go to a 3-day schedule or you were going to have a fixed day schedule, now's the time to edit it. What about the periods? Well, here they have like 10 scheduling periods, 7 plus a couple more here, okay? Here are your times, your instructional minutes. If you need to edit any of this stuff, now's the time to do the edit. Don't forget, after you've done the edit, always click Submit. And don't forget, you want to edit next year's stuff, not this year's stuff. It would be really bad to suddenly start editing the time schedules for this year, especially if you do state reports that are based on instructional minutes, as more and more of you folks do all the time. So we talked about track dates, we talked about term dates, report period dates. All these dates can be edited now. Frankly, I think it's a little early to start editing the calendar because your school board hasn't told you yet. Make sure you only edit next year's tracks. And remember, in those next year tracks, it's not the specific dates that matter yet. It's the number of terms and number of report periods. Once you have the tracks created, and remember, district, often called board, users, have no access to next year's scheduling. Everything I've shown you so far has to be performed by a school user. Most of our clients will continue to have school users own this next step. In fact, we recommend that you want school users to work on this next step. But before I show that to you, I'm going to tell you two things. Because remember, Al always has exceptions. Exception number one, particularly at smaller districts, a district or board user could handle next year tracks, grades, and statuses. If you only had 3, 4, 5 schools, board users could go do this. For a district much larger than that, any bigger than that, I would suggest having a school user do this. My second point is, if you work at a school from which students will move to another school in your district, a school operator can only do so much with those transferring students, as I will explain. So if you're a school operator at an elementary and your fifth graders are going to leave your building this summer and they're going to go to sixth grade in another building, you're a little bit limited, just a little bit limited in what you can do. So this next step, as this slide suggests obviously, is next year tracks, grades, and statuses. This form must be completed if you expect students to be available for your scheduling process. So we're going to log into Internet Explorer as our other operator. So let's go do that here quickly. We're going to go into Internet Explorer, and I don't want to be in the high school. I want to be in the middle school. It'll take me just a second to effect. You know what? I think that's probably going to work. We're going to go to, once you have the tracks created, but before we go any further, let me tell you this. When we go here, we go to scheduling and we go to next year tracks, grades, and statuses. That's in the setup menu. Here we go. Okay. This form always comes in blank, even if the process has already been completed. That's one of the reasons you only want one operator per building working on this. It is entirely possible that your building principal came in, set up the correct answers for each track for her entire building, and ran this. And then the building secretary came along. Maybe she filled out only a couple of the tracks, maybe 3 of them, and then she hit submit. Well, here's what just happened. Your first, second, and third graders, which the secretary edited, they're fine. But the fourth and fifth graders, which your principal originally edited, those kids who used to be fine, they're now blank. Because when the secretary came along, the fact that she didn't fill in the fourth and fifth grade information left those choices blank, as you see them right now. And that's what caused blank to overwrite the good information that the principal had entered. Now, I'm not here to pick on principals. I'm not here to pick on secretaries. I'm just here to make an example. I just needed 2 employees from the same building to explain to you how this screen works. Now, if you mess up with only one person, you can certainly go back and resubmit this page. But you have to fill in all of the tracks info. You can't leave one track blank. Because, you know, if everybody was previously submitted, you have to submit everybody again. We would suggest that if more than a couple days have passed and you find out that you made some mistake here, you probably should bypass this screen when you want to fix those kids and go to the student menu and pick the one global update. Much easier to fix things, okay? Now, your best strategy for errors that you make here is probably using that command over there on the student menu, global update. From this form, which you're looking at here, the strategy we strongly recommend is this. If a track of students is returning to your building next year, building operators should fill in all the blanks you see here. If a track of students is leaving you permanently, and here I mean leaving your district, not just leaving your building. I'm talking like graduation from your highest grade level, which for most of you, I'm talking about high school seniors. Building operators should only fill in the NYR out status. And I'll explain what that is in a minute. If a track of students is leaving your building at the end of the school year, but staying within your district, maybe they're moving from your elementary to your junior high or from your middle school to your high school, building operators should fill in every field they can about those kids and then let the personnel at the receiving school finish the job. Specifically, the receiving school has to fill in the NYR track because it's not going to be available to the sending school. Okay? If I'm a middle school operator and my highest grade level is 8, my NYR track is not here. The NYR track is a high school track because I'm a middle school operator, can't see it. Trust me, you'll hear a lot more about this in the next few minutes. As we consider this form, we will incorporate a concrete example of kids leaving your building but staying within your district. Let's look at the 8th graders, because those 8th graders will this spring graduate from this middle school. They move on to become 9th graders at our high school, meaning in our district. Now, let's review these 5 columns. You guys have seen these before, but let's look at these 5 columns. NYR in status, okay? This means what status do I want these kids to default to as they're in status next fall, okay? My 6th graders next fall will probably be some form of currently enrolled. My 7th graders will probably be some form of currently enrolled because those kids are staying with me. But these 8th graders, whoa, they're going somewhere else. So what status should they have for next year's fall enrollment? I happen to pick enroll from OMS, which is my middle school. Column 2, NYR out status. Now, despite the fact that somebody, or more accurately, some bodies, wrote this terminology such that it looks the same, it's really not the same. In column 1, it says NYR in status. And I told you this means next fall's in status. Well, now here we come to column 2, and the verbiage looks the same. It begins NYR, and that would suggest to me, if I hadn't been trained in this, that my choice here for out status would apply to next year. After all, column 1 begins NYR, and it applies to next year. But here in column 2, this is the only part of this entire chart that applies to this year. So where you see NYR out status, what it really means is, how is the student closing this year? What do I want her out status to be in May or June of 2014? And I'm going to go with graduated to the high school. Okay. Now, I suspect most students most of the time will have something like no diploma continuing. I should point out that all these codes you folks in your districts and boards have come up with. Okay. Sometimes you're pushed to them by a province or a state, but these are not made up by us at SchoolLogic. They're made up by you guys. And just remember, in this column, we're talking about how the student closes out this school year. Column 3, NYR grade level. This is pretty self-explanatory. What grade level are these kids going to be in next year? 6th graders are going to become 7th graders. 7th graders are going to become 8th graders. 8th graders are going to become 9th graders. By the way, you should be messing with the track. Think of the track here. Don't think of the grade level. But here, you're going to think of the grade level. Okay? Now, oh, wait. Keep in mind, we're simply setting up the defaults, which in a few minutes we will apply to all of our students. It's still the 2012-2013 school year. We're not even halfway done with it yet. Don't worry about the fact that kids might potentially be held back a grade. We are not going to worry about those kids yet. We can always move them back. Even after the rollovers this summer, we can move them back. What we're doing right now is we're moving kids into where we expect them to be next year. We need them to be in next year's grade, next year's track, next year's buildings, so that we can plan and schedule for next year. The handful of kids who might get held back, those kids can always be edited later. Column 4, NYR track. Here you choose which track your students should be moved into next year. My 6th graders are going to be in the 7th grade track next year. My current 7th graders are going to be in the 8th grade track next year. My current 8th graders are going to be in 9th grade track next year. Whoa! I don't have a 9th grade track. We touched on this before. Because I am a middle school operator, I don't have the track for next year. So I just got to leave that blank. Don't have a choice about it. Leave it blank. We recommend school operators rather than district operators should own this process. The school people go in once, remember, just once per school, and fill out this chart for their tracks for their building, except for the grade level, which is graduating from their building. And then at some later point, your receiving school goes in, and the receiving school uses Global Update to assign students to the proper track for next year. Remember, that applies only to students who are changing buildings but staying within your district. Oh, I almost forgot. I got so wrapped up in that, I nearly neglected here column 5. Column 5 is NYR school. Now, that's pretty self-explanatory. What school am I going to be in next year? My younger kids are going to still be in the middle school. My older kids, my 8th graders, are going to be in the high school. Okay? Now, this is pretty important because this choice that you make right here, that choice is what makes the graduating 8th graders available to the high school. Otherwise, if you don't do this part right, the software doesn't know where to move those kids. So, let's review. There are 3 groups of students for which you will fill out the NYR tracks, grades, and statuses form. Students who are remaining in your school, students who leave your school but stay within your district, and students who leave your school and are not returning to your district, meaning the highest grade level in your district, usually those high school seniors. Probably all have cars by now, or snowmobiles. So let's look at how we handle each of those groups. Now, let's start with the first group, students who are leaving your school for a school within your district. Maybe they're going from juniors high school to high school. For those kids, you're going to fill out the NYR out status, the NYR grade, the NYR school. Okay? Remember, out status is how they're leaving you this year. NYR school, huge, because that's what makes them available to the intake school. The second group of kids, kids who remain in your school, we want them to have an NYR out status, an NYR grade, an NYR track, and of course their school is going to be the current school. And then lastly, you've got these kids who are leaving your school and leaving your district. They're probably seniors, unless you're a K-8 district. We have a lot of K-8 districts. Then it's an 8th grader. Okay? All you have to do is give them an NYR out status. Nothing else is required. Really simple right there. Oh, hey, quick troubleshooting note for you here. We advise you to resist the temptation to display your NYR fields, or any field, in more than one place on your student demographic screens. Okay? Let me show you what I mean by that. This particular school, if I go into demographics, I am going to see on page number 2 of the student records the fact that, oh, by the way, they've got information there for the NYR year. I'm going to take my buddy here, Aaron Braden, when he comes up. Aaron's kind of slow. Here we go, student page number 2. NYR grade, NYR school, NYR track. So this is displayed here in demographics. We at SchoolLogic don't want you to do that. We created for you a special place right here under the student menu called Demographics Next Year Fields. Here's all your NYR stuff in one place at one time. Now, the reason we tell you not to also place it somewhere else is we can't guarantee that if you make a change on this screen, that change is going to get carried over to the other screen. And I'm not talking about just NYR fields. I'm talking about any field. So avoid showing it in 2 different places. Well. What else can we do this month to help our scheduling efforts work more smoothly in the coming months? Let's go back to next year's schedule. How about that? We're going to go to the scheduling menu. We're going to pick next year's schedule. Let's look at our menu here. We've talked about the school. We've talked about the tracks. Well, we haven't talked about rooms yet. What's the story on rooms and what's the story on staff? Well, remember those tables in SQL? For these two items, they're shared over the 2 years. You cannot delete a room or a staff member from next year without having the system delete them from current year. So for rooms and staff, it's fine to add, but don't delete. Rooms, courses, don't delete. Okay? A frequent question we get is, how do we recommend new teachers are added in the situation where you know right now you're going to get a new staff member, but you are literally months away from hiring her? Remember Doug Robertson, our scheduling guru, who's worked with a lot of you over the time? His answer is this. Use new as the first name of our staff member, and then use her department as her last name, as you see in the first example here. And then if you get more than one new science teacher, hey, first of all, that's cool, but secondly, number them, okay? When the new person comes in, you type the person's real name over top of new science, you know, first name, last name. Just type them over top of, no problem. Okay, let's go back and look at SchoolLogic. What else can we do here? You know what? What about courses? What have we done with courses for next year? Like rooms and staff, courses can be added at this point, but not deleted. In fact, you almost never delete courses. Courses cannot be deleted as long as they are attached to grade records in student history or they're attached to classes you're teaching in current year. Now, some districts need to have their district operators involved at this point, or you might be editing all of the course information at your building level. Some installations have the courses lookup table set as district-owned, and if that's the case where you work, any changes or additions to courses have to be made by a district login. What about prerequisites? Have we messed with prerequisites yet? This is a good time of the year to update your prerequisites. You remember how they work? If you have multiple prerequisites, in fact, let me get you into a little different database here. I want to show you the high school perspective of this. Same database, different school, because I want to show you the prereqs. Okay? We were in scheduling, we were in courses. Beautiful. Now, you remember, if you go into prereqs, if you see two of them and they're on the same line, that means they're joined by and. So for a student to get into this pre-calc class, he has to have taken accounting semester 1 and accounting semester 2. But if you look at this chart and you see they're vertical, well then that means they're joined by or. Okay? So in this case, Johnny has to have taken accounting S1 plus accounting S2, or instead of those two, he has to have taken advanced comp A. Okay? Adobe Photoshop. In order to get into Adobe Photoshop, that's this class, you have to have taken this course plus this course. To get into pre-calculus, it's what we showed you before. You have to have taken these two or this one. Okay? And you click on, by the way, if you want to mess with those, you go ahead and click on Add Prerequisite, and you click here, and you pick a couple, and you pick another one. Always remember to click Submit. Boom. They're joined horizontally, so they're and. Now, suppose I didn't want to do that. Suppose I wanted them to be joined by or. You'd come in here, you'd say Add Prereq. I want drafting, I want Photoshop. And you come back a second time, you pick one again, and you pick a different thing. So now they're joined vertically, that means they're or. So it's Adobe Photoshop or chemistry in order to get into this Art Studio course. Template maintenance. We haven't looked at that yet. That can play into our planning for next year. Remember these guys? Okay? Add your templates, but don't edit existing templates, since doing so would mess up your current year templates. Now, if you're doing a different schedule for next year and you're adding new templates, name or designate those new templates in such a way that you know which templates are which. Maybe you've got an asterisk at the beginning of your name of your new templates, or maybe you've got an NYR at the beginning of your names, okay? You want to be able to tell the new templates from the old templates. By the way, after you do the rollovers in the summer, that's the time to delete the old templates, the templates your kids are currently using but which they won't need for next year. Which brings us to our final check-in point of the day. We are going to talk about requests. Are the requests that you have, you know they roll over from year to year, are those still accurate? If a student, let's go look, okay, let's go back to courses. And let's go to Advanced Comp. Got one of those here? Advanced Comp A, okay? If a student asks for advanced composition, is he going to get what you really want them to have, okay? We need to be on the request form, and we're going to see, let's go into next year. Requests. Okay, here's my list of requests. Let's go look at advanced accounting. Well, let's look at it this way, because this is really interesting. This guy right here, this inactive business. Okay, if a student asks for advanced composition, will you still want them to receive advanced comp A and advanced comp B? That's a question. Okay, you set up a request some time ago that said, look, if Johnny asks for advanced comp, I want him to get advanced comp A and I want him to get advanced comp B. Well, look at the last item in the request form at lower left, inactive. You have to say no in order to get this request to show up as being available to students. This is a little hard to follow, I will readily admit, because of the way my teammates in development chose to word this screen. If we do not want this request to be available, we say yes. What we're saying yes to is the fact that the request will be inactive. If we say no to inactive, that means the course is in play. For example, if you were like the high school I attended and you only offered Latin every other year, you could turn this request on and off the year, turn it on for the years you're going to offer the class, turn it off for the years you're not going to offer it. Okay? Let's go look at advanced accounting quick. Advanced accounting, I've said that this course is open to 11th and 12th graders. Let's see if that's true. We're going to go to SchoolLogic, and in SchoolLogic, we are going to log in as a senior. Remember, I said advanced accounting is open to 11th and 12th graders. The parent and or the teacher comes into SchoolLogic, they click on course request, and we got it, advanced accounting, okay? I wanted to show you this screen in SchoolLogic because this is the most efficient way for your school district to get requests in for next year, in my humble opinion. Because you know what? You're getting the students and the parents to do the work. You set up rules. You see them here on the left side of the screen. And then the parents and the students actually enter the requests. Now about these rules. You set these rules up in Logic Admin, part of our suite of products. You're not in there a lot, but that controls largely what goes on in TeacherLogic and what goes on in HomeLogic. You can require students to ask for a certain number of requests. You can tell them they have to ask for a certain number of credits, or you can ask for a certain number of course units. Course units are displayed out here. If the students and their parents want to know which course or courses make up a request, you hover. So I come out here and I hover by advanced comp, because that's the name of my request, advanced composition. But notice when I hover there, it tells me, really, Johnny, you're getting advanced comp A and advanced comp B. Now, if they want a course description, that's actually available on the hover too. What I had done back in SchoolLogic under notes, I believe, or comments in the courses, I can set up, notice it says in the middle of that, right after the top course, it says this is a course description. Okay, so you can enter course descriptions in SchoolLogic, and those course descriptions flow into SchoolLogic. So, way cool. You just go in, oh, okay, you want me to show you where that really came from? Okay, if you go to courses, I got CAP Pre-Calc. I have to go here under comment. This is an example of a course description for CAP Pre-Calc. Absolutely what you just started to see in the other screen. Way cool, eh? I like this ability to do the requests in SchoolLogic. This is so cool. Okay, now check this out. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to enter my 3 requests to meet my minimums. I want advanced comp, I want English, and I want novels. I'm going to click next. On the next screen, I can enter alternates to those requests. I can ask for which term the class is going to be in. I can ask for a preferred teacher, and the keyword there is preferred. Now, in Logic Admin, because I know a lot of you guys are rolling your eyes right now and you're saying to yourselves, I don't want my kids to be able to ask for staff members. Hey, no problem. You can turn this off in Logic Admin. If you turn off step number 2 in Logic Admin, then step number 3 becomes step number 2, and the parents and teachers are never the wiser. They have no idea what they missed, okay? So, way cool. Okay, everybody take a breath. Those were the basics of how to set yourself up now so that scheduling goes more smoothly later. Let's review. What did we do today? We created next year, and that first action we made actually creates the tracks and the master boards for next year. We discussed the issues that arise from having 2 years but only 1 database. Remember, there are 7 tables that are shared between next year and current year. I emphasized, some might say I hit you over the head with, the fact that the process to make next year tracks needs to be done in the software, not manually. Let the software make the tracks. We discussed next year tracks, grades, and statuses, kind of at length. We talked about editing and adding rooms and teachers. Remember, rooms and teachers are part of our 7 magic tables. Well, we only add, we never delete at this point in the year. And we looked at requests and how parents and students can make requests in SchoolLogic. I know a lot of you guys do that already. I think everybody should do that. One of the coolest functions in our software. As I said at the outset, for this calendar year, our webinar series is riding into the sunset. We will be back after the holiday break with more of these fun-filled, action-packed hours. Until then, you'll be able to replay this webinar and all of our other efforts on our community pages. And you know the trail to the community pages, community.schoollogic.com. Hey, don't run away just yet. And this just in, and I'm not kidding. My boss just told me this morning. Each and every one of you will be receiving an email with a survey. Every one of you who fills out a survey and sends it back to us will be placed in a prize drawing for a restaurant gift card. They just told me this morning. As soon as we pick the winner, we'll use Google Earth to locate a restaurant near you. So, hey, thank you so much for attending. All of us at SchoolLogic wish you a happy, restful holiday season. A final point before I let you go, I should tell you, our offices will be closed Wednesday, December 25 through Wednesday, January 1. I hope that you will be out of your offices those same days. Again, thanks for dropping by.